the best tool I have found is actually Notebook LM, and that's a free AI tool that Google released. I want to say closer to 2 years ago. But what it does is it allows you to upload almost any type of resource, PDFs, YouTube videos, transcripts, images, whatever, into it and ask questions against those sources. So unlike ChatGPT, where you can plug in like 10 items into a custom GPT and say, "Oh, now," and give it a set of instructions. That ChatGPT model is still going to reference external sources outside of those 10 that you uploaded. Notebook, however, will only source or cite answers from the things that you tell it.
If you're enjoying the show, hit subscribe so that you never miss an episode. You'll get the latest on marketing, AI, and how to grow your business. It only takes 2 seconds and really helps the show grow. So please hit subscribe and then continue listening. Grant, great to have you on the podcast. Obviously, you have your own agency doing AI and marketing, which we'll get into as well. But I know we rescheduled the podcast, and you mentioned you were doing some like race car driving. So I'm curious, what what does that involve? Are you the driver? Are you the passenger? What's it like? I had actually, just to give some context, I had an ex-boyfriend who was very much into racing and drifting and went to Japan. So yeah, curious what you're into in that space.
Yeah. No, it wasn't anything to that caliber. It was a company retreat, and basically we actually went out to. So I'm in northern Colorado, but we went out to Centennial Airport, um, and there's a company out there that does big. They have a pretty big track, and so you can rent different types of sports cars or like professional go-karts, which is kind of a weird term to combine. And so my whole team basically spent the vast majority of the day yesterday just playing Mario Kart without any bananas or blue shells. But yeah, it was a great time. Um, yeah, I think they had little gunners on, so you, I think the max speed was like 45, but still whip it around some S turns pretty quickly, and it gets a little hairy, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of those adrenaline sports are very fun because things get a bit hairy and there's a bit of, oh, excitement. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Um, and definitely a good or just a unique way of bonding with a team for sure.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of companies maybe either don't do things like that or don't um do like at all, or they do activities that are not as, I think, yeah, morale building. And so it's, I think a lot of employees just want to like go and have fun, or just people in general just want to have more fun in life. So yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you think just we spend so much time behind a screen, let alone, people always complain about the amount of time that they're spent in meetings, but actually spending, dedicating one day, doesn't even maybe on every 6 months, just dedicate one day to actually like get to know your coworkers, and your other team members. It's silly that we don't do that more frequently, or that companies don't recognize the value in it.
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, be good if they did in the future. I think the companies that do are very successful in comparison. Um, but obviously, like you, as I mentioned, you have your own AI marketing business. In terms of, maybe we could start out, we'll get into AI shortly, but what has it been like building a service-based business? What are some things you've learned in that sort of space?
Yeah, yeah. So just a little bit of my background. So I come from construction. I like if you look behind me, there's a few blurred out drones on the wall. Um, and so my background's in like visual design and drone work. So really, my career up to this point has been built around this idea of service-based work. All the different SaaS and tech companies I've worked at throughout the years, my role has been in service of the salespeople, in service of the marketing people. And so what we do nowadays, the consultancy I started, it's no different. The audience is essentially residential and commercial builders. That's the only difference. I'm still doing the same role in terms of helping to find best in class tools and helping to instill best in class practices.
That's cool. And so when you decided to sort of go out on your own, was there like something that kind of made you make that decision, or like what kind of built up to that kind of deciding to go out on your own?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, this is actually the second business that I've started. I started another service-based company years ago, that was specifically with drones. It was a drone brokerage, or is a drone brokerage, basically connecting pilots with project managers, all through automation. And this time, or with this company though, I saw even greater need in terms of residential builders. If you go to a coffee shop, any Starbucks probably in the country, you're going to find a billboard with a bunch of local contractors and home builders and realtors and whoever else on there.
Business cards.
All of those people, yeah, exactly. But all of those builders on that sheet essentially struggle with more or less the same issues. And it's, everything from lead generation all the way through like their sales process, sales automation, and then client retention and reputation. And that's kind of that was kind of like the aha moment for me, is I just kind of understood the total addressable market that is residential design and construction. And after, a few of my friends who were also in that kind of niche or that industry were struggling, I was like, okay, this is actually a pivotal moment. I can actually make a lot of traction and momentum here.
That's cool. I think that it's a really interesting point. It's something I also discovered, but in the accounting and financial services industry, I think in doing kind of like a business based on an industry or a need that you see is can be really effective because it's like, I think especially construction, and I think it's probably quite similar in a sense to the accounting and financial services industry because people are very technically based knowledge wise, like they have a very particular skill set, but in terms of like marketing, they don't either want to do it or they don't know how to do it, or it's not traditionally done in that industry. Like for example, in the accounting industry, a lot of people will just buy out firms instead of doing marketing. And that's just kind of like how it's been done in the past. And so yeah, I think it's a similar thing where it's like, yeah, finding like these kind of industries or businesses that struggle with their marketing and then offering a service. I think that's a really cool angle to take and a really interesting story of like seeing all the business cards and all of the ads at Starbucks, for instance. Like I can just imagine that because I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I'm even pretty active in this group called the NAHB, or the National Association of Home Builders. And that's just in the US, but that alone, I think, has close to 80,000 members. And those are essentially, you know, builders and remodelers who are over 1.5 million in annual revenue. So if you just think of that market alone in the US, it's massive, and the competition is kind of fierce when it comes to, you know, making sure your brand stands out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this was another thing that I learned was like finding like in terms of like looking for clients or looking for like qualified leads, which we'll obviously talk about leads shortly, but is like making sure they obviously like have the capital or the revenue or availability to spend on something like marketing, because obviously there's like a minimum amount that you need to charge per month to really do a decent job for somebody and their business. And so like something like construction or real estate or accounting or law firms or these kind of bigger ticket industries, they have the budget to spend on marketing and they have like resources versus like a mom and pop shop down the road that sells like a milk bar, for instance, is going to have a very different marketing budget to say like a high end law firm. And so that was like a good insight for me, even though I like it's potentially there are other challenges in terms of the market might be a bit more resistant to marketing because they do things more traditionally. So it can be a harder sell in some ways. You do have an easier sell in other ways. So there's like this, looking at clients of what's like, the return on investment, how much impact can I actually have? Like for me, it's like, oh, these accounting firms like don't they just kind of are like, just do it for us. Like we don't want to do it. We don't know. And there's like a big positive impact that I can have. Whereas like it's not going to be the same in every industry, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that's the number one thing, right? Is, you know, for anybody who's thinking of who has kind of that entrepreneurial spirit or just, likes the this for anybody who has this idea of a side hustle, but it extends past the idea, I would say the number one thing that you should really focus on and spend 85 to 90% of your free time, maybe not that, just a large percentage of your free time thinking about is the problem, not your solution. Spending as much time with your customer and like understanding their world, understanding the problems that they have. And then once you have that and understanding the impact of that problem, is it, is that problem, they're spending so much time in a spreadsheet or that they don't have the time to allocate to marketing, and then that's ultimately hindering them from reaching their revenue goals, or they're just not profitable, or whatever. If you can really spend time with them and understand that, then you can start to think about where you fit in and how you can actually help them solve it.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really good point of just it's kind of like what you did, right? Like you weren't just like, oh, I'm going to go and do this marketing in this industry. You saw a problem and you were like, oh, there's all these construction companies and they're trying to advertise and it's a competitive industry. And, I have friends and like this is something I can bring value to. And I think sometimes I speak from personal experience, we can get stuck thinking this is the way my business should be or this is what I want it to look like instead of, well, what does the market need? What is the problem? And like, I've had ideas where I'm like, oh, I'm going to run my business in this industry. And then I just started getting referrals from accounting firms because I used to be an accountant, and like part of me was like, it's not really what I planned on, but it started happening. So I was like, oh, there's a need here. I want to serve this market rather than, so it's almost like paying attention to like what clients are you already getting or what is a skill set that you have uniquely to offer to people or businesses rather than just kind of I think we can all get locked into that. Well, it needs to look this way. And it's like, well, maybe it could look completely different and you might enjoy it more or make more money or have more fulfillment in what you're doing if you kind of, yeah, follow the thread of wherever life leads you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's the I was actually listening to a different podcast on the drive back yesterday, and they were talking about Bezos or Jeff Bezos' 10 rules, a business that he released in I think 1997, and how it's still super applicable today. And one of those was just the importance of always staying curious when it comes to your customer and not not getting into this, cycle of complacency. And because as soon as you do, as soon as you lose that curiosity, not only do you experience burnout, but also you're gonna start, just drastically hemorrhaging customers and the value that you're providing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that kind of comes up a lot on the podcast, especially around the AI pieces, like staying curious and having that learner's mindset of, I don't know everything. And just because I know something today doesn't mean it's still going to work or be applicable tomorrow. And so rather than calling ourselves like experts, it's kind of like, keeping that curiosity and that wonder of like, what else can I do? Or how can I approach this differently? Or, do I need a human to do this? Or could an AI program do this? Or is it better to have a human do this? And really, it seems to be like a big piece of maintaining curiosity and wonder is like asking questions and asking like, how are we doing this? Or what are we doing? And how could it be better? And really, rather than being like, oh, I know everything, it's like being in that questioning kind of point of view. And so, in terms of like getting leads, I know you mentioned before we hit record that you have had a lot of success in the AI space with lead magnets. And I'm curious, sort of, yeah, like what your learnings have been, what that process looks like, how you've seen success, and what maybe some business owners listening could implement to sort of, yeah, do the same.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I love talking about this, so
Mhm.
I could kind of share into it. But yeah, one of the biggest traffic or just lead generators for me has been essentially creating high value lead magnets. And I do that again by focusing on, in my case, I focus on six problems. So again, everything from like marketing and lead flow all the way down to like employee and subcontractor management. And I work hand in hand with AI in terms of helping to create ideas for magnets that would be valuable to someone experiencing one of those six problems. Um, and so my goal, or at least the mission with it, is to be so consistent that I am creating a new lead magnet every 2 weeks and following essentially a content calendar. But instead of a content calendar, it's a lead magnet calendar. So some of those can be, guides to like building out your first website using Gamma. Or I built one that was the Dream 100, which is a list of 100 items that a lot of homeowners don't realize that they need. And from a remodeler standpoint, it's a great asset. It's a great leave behind. And so just, creating deliverables like that every 2 weeks and then dropping them in the right channels has been phenomenal for me. Um, and, the nice part about it too, like you mentioned having a learner mindset. I would say one of the best parts about AI and this age of artificial intelligence now is it gives you the if you allow it, there's so much room for play. There's so much room for finding tools like Descript or Gamma or really any um, potential use case. There's probably an AI tool being developed for it. And in my case, though, usually it's either um, like vibe coding if I need an app that's actually developed, or I'll use again Gamma to create anything that is, on brand, on point, but also applicable with either a presentation in the document or even like a, you know, quick web page.
That's cool. And so in terms of like promoting, you mentioned promoting the lead magnets or putting them in the right channels. Like what's your process is does that differ depending on what the tool is or like where are you sort of promoting these tools? And then probably part two of the question would be what sort of lead magnets or tools are you finding work best? Is it like a calculator, a quiz, a PDF, like a bot? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, so my audience, again, like being residential builders and contractors, most of them are in that NAHB group, and it's a forum. So every 2 weeks, I basically have a method now where I create a quick post asking for feedback or asking just for saying, hey, I have this free resource, free asset. And with a form, it's gated. So I have a form that, people have to fill out really quickly in order to receive the asset. Um, and then they, of course, get enrolled into a nurture campaign that backs it. But finding the channel, and what I mean by that is like finding the community, right? YouTube and social media is great for numerous things, making connections, building your own network, and then building your brand or helping to support your brand. But if you can find the community where your audience is most active, that is a gold mine, 100%. Um, and communicate to them in their language and also show value consistently. But the most valuable assets that I've seen the highest turnaround on are anything that's kind of metric driven calculators, because again, in residential construction, those are generally the most sought after. A lot of builders might not know how to calculate one type of KPI. They might not know how to calculate, like work in progress, accounting adjustment, like a WIP, things like that. And so just being able to say, hey, I put this together for you. If you're struggling with this, here's the value you're going to get. Check it out.
That's cool.
That things like that have just been super valuable.
I think that's cool. That's actually someone else mentioned something similar, about, yeah, like creating something like a tool rather than traditionally a lead magnet would be maybe a PDF guide or an ebook or something. And I think people just don't have time to read stuff like that these days. And it's just everybody's doing it, so they're not as valuable as they used to be. But yeah, creating like a calculator, or I know other people do like a quiz, asking for feedback, getting kind of buy-in, and then being like, oh, thanks to the community for helping me. Here's the full tool if you want to use it, or here's the full version. So I think that's, yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. And I think a lot of people will get a lot of value out of that. And then I guess in terms of, you sort of mentioned you're using AI to create a new tool or a new lead magnet each kind of 2 weeks. Do you have particular AI tools that you prefer using for this? You mentioned previously vibe coding. Do you have particular platforms that you use? Are you kind of white labeling it, like what, and then just putting a landing page together? Like, what does that kind of look like?
Yeah. So I actually use a tool called Zeit. It's essentially it's, as far as I know, a very much unheard of coding
Yeah, I've
platform.
not heard of it. How do you spell it?
I Zite.
Z-I-T. Okay.
It was actually built or released by the company that builds my forms. So I was using a tool called, or I'm still using a tool called Fill Out as all of the forms on my website and on all these different landing pages and assets and things. And they released it, and I was actually really skeptical of it at first. I had used Cursor and Replit for a while, and I really liked both. Replit was killer. Unfortunately, it just got too pricey. Um, but Zype is, I haven't really had any qualms with it. It's incredibly cost effective, incredibly responsive, and because they already have the backend database with the form integration, as well as like, Supabase, Google Drive, all these different integrations that are native, it's just been a perfect layup with its capabilities. And also just, its UI UX is incredibly responsive. They integrate with all the LLMs and MCP models. So basically, you can, interact with ChatGPT or GPT-5 and code off of that, or you can do Claude if you prefer. Um, but yeah, so tons of different avenues there. This one I've just found to be tremendous. Um, and yeah. So I use that is probably my daily driver when it comes to vibe coding different tools and just seeing how feasible things are. And then for anything, again, like landing pages or client facing presentations or documents or anything like that, I use Gamma. Um, and if your audience or if you haven't checked out Gamma, I that is probably the second that is top three of best tools I found in the last, I would say, 13 months.
Gamma.
Yeah, GAMMA.
Yeah, my friend actually mentioned that the other day and was like, "Oh, I love this program." And I was like, "Oh, I have to check it out." So you're the second person that's, yeah, mentioned it.
Yeah. I'm very active on the Gambassador community too. So if anybody who's listening to this does end up signing up, make sure to try and join the Slack channel. You'll see my name, uh, dropping tutorials and whatnot.
That's cool. That's cool. And so I'm just thinking for, say, people listening and they're like, this sounds great. Like, obviously we can't do like a step-by-step example on a podcast, but what are some things that maybe they can think about? You mentioned in the construction industry, obviously people want calculators. Um, how did you kind of discover that if someone's listening and they're in the beauty industry or e-commerce, how could they, like, not just giving them the answer, but how could they think about some really high quality lead magnets? Or is it about asking, say, joining some of these communities, asking people for what they want before even creating something rather than just assuming, oh, they're going to want this? What do you recommend for that?
Yeah. So I said Gamma was top three. The best tool I have found is actually Notebook LM, and that's a free AI tool that Google released. I would say closer to 2 years ago. But what it does is it allows you to upload almost any type of resource, PDFs, YouTube videos, transcripts, images, whatever, into it and ask questions against those sources. So unlike ChatGPT, where you can plug in like 10 items into a custom GPT and say, "Oh, now," and give it a set of instructions, that ChatGPT model is still going to reference external sources outside of those 10 that you uploaded. Notebook, however, will only source or cite answers from the things that you tell it. And so what's
Like a
tremendous about
closed
this
ecosystem.
is, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
it stands for RAG, or sorry, it's actually so ChatGPT and Gemini and Grok and all those are LLMs, or large language models. And Notebook is in a new classification called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. And that basically just means it's kind of it acts differently. It has a much lower, what is that called, hallucination, than you would get in a ChatGPT or different AI model. Um, or actually zero hallucination because it's only pulling from the things that you tell it to pull from. But that's a very long-winded way. I just wanted to give you some, like, your audience a little bit of a backstory on that, because the takeaway is if you can get, YouTube videos, transcripts from calls, um, anything from your Slack communities. So talking about a beauty salon, or, trying to understand that world. If you can spend time on YouTube and these different communities and gather as many of these resources as you can, and then put them into a notebook, if you ask that notebook, hey, what are the 10 common issues that are trending across all of these sources? It answers it for you.
Right. That's cool. I think that it's actually something I was working on this morning. I was writing a blog post about this, but the power of research in the AI kind of space right now, like everybody, oh, well, not everybody, but a lot of people are just using it to generate content. But I think there's this big leverage point, which is around research, which is around using, exactly like you said, some of these tools to do very specific, refined, targeted research, whether that's within Notebook LLM to create a lead magnet, or whether that's going and doing a bot to pull data from Reddit and all these different customer review platforms or forums to create better content or better copywriting. It's, I think, a very underutilized part of the AI industry is just its power of research. And I'm really glad you mentioned that. And then because that's kind of how I like to approach marketing is like, let's not go out and just do things. Like, let's make sure we know why we're doing this and what effect it can have as much as possible. Obviously, you can't, you know, ensure everything and guarantee it, but you can kind of, like research in different ways in these really interesting, creative ways that would take hours and hours and weeks before to do this kind of research. You can build a bot, you can build an automation once you know the sequence of steps, or even if it's manual, the summarization of it's obviously a lot quicker because it's pulling and gathering all the data, whether that's externally or internally through like notebook LLM. And I think that's just a really cool aspect of AI that I think a lot of people maybe haven't tapped into that value yet. So I'm really curious if people do like just what's possible.
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of, you know, like there is so much value that extends outside of just content generation or creating, cool. I mean, it is cool in its own right, but and it's on Veo 3 or images in Chat GBT. The deep research capabilities that you get in a lot of LLMs are phenomenal. Like, most of my notebooks nowadays, the notebook LMs, they're actually just built up on like all of the deep research articles that I've had Gemini and ChatGPT generate. And if it's like, what are the best practices for like a landing page format? It's something as simple as that you probably could just see in a visual. But I have essentially a PhD thesis on that topic. And then I can just, throw that into a notebook and say, hey, I'm working on this today. What are the best practices for that? And it's pulling in, so many sources. Um, but yeah, the research capabilities are insane with what you can do nowadays.
For sure. And I think it's just getting like better, obviously, and more extensive. And I think, it's probably like we're a lot of people, myself included, are focused on kind of like the output, but now we all have access to the same kind of tools. And the output, what really makes the difference in the competitive advantage is the inputs. And that's obviously where the research comes in, where it's like, one, one, are we doing research to begin with? And two, what kind of research is it? And then three, is that research accurate? And kind of like really kind of going into each one of those. And then will it also like get us to where we want to go, And I think like that will just create better inputs. So then when we go, like you said, deep research, you go and gather all this information or gather all this research and then put it in to the LLM or whatever have you, the other AI tools with a very clear set of parameters. All of a sudden, yes, you're using the same tool, but the inputs are vastly different to what most people are doing. And I think this is something I spoke with someone the other day about where like it's never been easier to do anything you want, but it's also never been easier to do nothing. And so that's, I guess, one of the dark sides of AI is that it's just easy to be lazy. It's easy to skip over research or to skip over certain things and just kind of get a bit like, "Oh, I'm just gonna rush this through." And so I think, yes, it's like I mentioned it's being a dark side, but it's also like a huge opportunity then for the people who do put the time and effort into researching and who do put the time and effort into learning these AI tools and using them constructively, using them in really innovative ways, because most people are not gonna be doing that, and I think it's only gonna get easier to do nothing, So I think it's a really like in one hand, like it's people are getting lazier, but then it's also like there's this huge because of that, there's a huge opportunity in the space for people to, yeah, step up and have a positive impact.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, and going back to, our original topic, like you said, it is going to be easier. It is so ridiculously easy to create anything nowadays.
Yeah.
The problem though is unless you're still focused on your end customer and their life, their problems, the result that they want, you're just creating smoke. You're creating
Yeah,
you're littering the internet essentially.
totally agree. Yeah, it's like it's very easy to feel productive in this day and age. Like, oh, look, I generated all this deep research. Or look, I got all this business plan from ChatGPT. And it's like, cool. Like you mentioned, it's just smoke unless you actually go and implement it, unless you go and take action on it. And I think that's a big sticking point for a lot of people because it's easy to just kind of feel like we're doing something, but we're kind of just spinning our wheels. And it's like you mentioned, yeah, like, are we actually giving our customers what they want? Are we actually moving towards our goal? Do we actually know what our goal is? Do we remember, like, oh, I'm going in this direction? Or do we end up going off course? And so it's there's a lot of noise in the space, a lot of noise in the world in general, and I think it's just this practice of taking a step back, pausing, and, like, reviewing, "Okay, like, what am I doing, and why am I doing it? Where am I going?" And again, like we sort of talked about before, the asking the questions about, being curious and, like, "Oh, am I it's okay if I'm off track," but, like, just kind of having something built in to remind you, like to check in, like once a week or once a day or however often, once a month, to be like, is this tool or is this thing that I'm doing actually moving me closer to where I want to go or to my customers' goals as well?
Oh, absolutely. And just talking about, like the importance of that. Like you can even use AI to help you prioritize, to help you stay on track.
Totally.
Even one of the this isn't I try and do this in Todoist, but every night I look at my schedule for tomorrow and write down, or in this case, put it in my to-do list of what are the most important things that I need to focus on tomorrow. And then before I leave the office the next day, I make sure those things are checked off. And I try and do that every single day. Um, and AI absolutely can help you do that if you need it to. But people have also been doing that for 1,000 years. So, it just depends on what works best for you.
And I think too, like, I'm glad you mentioned all of that because I think it's very cool how many amazing tools are out there and how many processes and systems we can automate. And I'm curious to know what your perspective on this is. I do believe there is a danger of over optimizing and over automating things. And I've seen this in action where and someone I talked to about this was like, yeah, I think anything customer facing, be very careful automating because people still want human contact. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on how to tell if the tool is actually like helpful for solving a problem or if we're kind of veering into that risk of like over optimizing or over automating and sort of like how to watch out for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it's something to really stay mindful of. I think, there should always be a human in the loop. Um, because I don't know. I personally don't want to live in a Black Mirror episode. Um,
Me either.
and, and I, I just think that, especially with if you think of the end result, like even something as like maybe mundane as like an inspection. So having a checklist and a SOP or standard operating procedure of, okay, historically, this is how people did it is they went to a bridge, had a checklist and said, okay, does it, suffice these requirements? Yes, yes, yes. Take a photo of this. If it's not up to compliance, send it off. So it could have been a Word doc. It could have been anything. Um, but without having someone in the loop, if you're just having a robot or, a camera do its own inspection, there's so many, I guess, like um, subtleties or things that could be missed without even like an idea of how to generate a new component to a bridge or anything like that. Um, I think that just in most capabilities or in most workflows, having a human in the loop to just do a quick QA QC for
Hmm.
quality assurance and quality control is vital. Um, and by no means am I recommending that that be someone's entire role, but you know, knowing what to look for and knowing what certain red flags mean, I think there's just so much risk of putting all of your eggs in the basket of, yeah, I believe that workflow works now and it will never not work.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And this is something I talked to someone else about actually. Speaking of putting eggs in one basket, is that could apply across a whole business, like not just relying on one advertising channel, one social media platform, one client base, or, one main client or one payment processor. Like putting all the eggs in one basket in terms of an automation or an AI tool, like these things, they fail at times. Not often, but they do fail. And so having backup systems, I think, is really important. What are you going to do if one day this program gets hacked, or your internet goes down, or your computer system goes down? Like, what is the, like rainy day plan, basically, or the fail safe for that? And so, yeah, I think it's really important. And I think I've just seen businesses automate processes in terms of like customer facing things, and it's just not something that I would recommend just because, again, like you mentioned, like things can go wrong and things like automated processes, they do make mistakes. And so I think automation can transform a business from like an administration point of view or handling those entry level tasks or highly like low risk tasks, but anything kind of higher risk or customer facing, yeah, I think it's important to keep an eye out for those. But and then I guess one more question, just in terms of what would you say are like kind of conversion best practices in terms of like lead generation or converting on sales calls or things like that?
Oh yeah. Um, with, I guess top of funnel, right? With getting traffic and managing traffic, understand who it is that you're serving to the point where you almost have like a persona or an avatar of that person of that business and understand who you can't help. I would say if you and I'm not saying, have an automated filter of, oh, that person doesn't check 75% of my boxes, so they go into my nurture campaign. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, help where you can. And one of the most important things you can do is to say no to the opportunities where you aren't a best fit. Once you learn to say no, it's almost one of the most valuable skill sets you can pick up.
100% agree.
But it's also hard, but
Yes.
that's a huge win. And then, which is kind of a weird thing in itself, saying no is a win. But anyway, and that kind of extends even into your sales process, right? Like knowing what levers you can pull on and ultimately what the end goal for your client is in your sales process helps essentially make that transition. So because essentially what they're doing, no matter what type of thing you're selling, no matter what type of problem you're trying to help them overcome, it's change management. You're trying to help them adopt a new system or a new tool or a new way of thinking. And if y- essentially if you can align it to, I'm, I'm the trusted expert in this and I know you trust me and they know that they trust you. If you can get to that stage, even if you're not the best fit and you can tell them that, like, I understand where you're at in your journey and I understand, what your end goal is. I need to tell you that I'm not the best fit for it, but I'm going to help you I'm going to introduce you. I'm going to help you along in your journey. that builds trust. And if you do that, if you repeat that enough times with the wrong customer, you're going to get customers from that. You're going to get more of the right customers from that type of action.
For sure. Yeah, no, I feel like I could do a whole podcast episode or series on just the power of saying no. It's something that's been very a big theme in my life, probably for the last sort of 12 months has just been that, like learning just how to say no so that then you can say yes to the things that are aligned. Um, so yeah, deeply resonate with that. And also what you said about like knowing who you serve and then knowing who you don't serve. And I actually updated my website not long ago with that, like in mind of like, oh, this is exactly who we serve. This is, and then this is who we don't serve. And it's been so helpful, like for me to know that, to communicate that for website visitors, and then also like for search engines, because then they can compile everything. And I think it's just I think we're coming into this age of clarity of there's so much information out there, so how concise and clear can we be? And I think that's the sort of content that's gonna stand out and people are gonna go, "Oh, I know what she's talking about, or I know what they're talking about. This makes sense to me. Yes, I'm interested," kind of thing. So yeah, appreciate you sharing that. And we're on time, but for people who want to know more about you and what you do, where can they connect with you online?
Sure. As far as I know, I am the only Grant Fuellenbach on LinkedIn. Um, and so I'm very active on there. Or, our website, we have two. One is Go First Consulting. That's our primary. And then if you want to learn more about, any of these resources or just to see, this shining face on YouTube, beyondthebid.co is kind of our brand page as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Grant, for coming on the podcast, and thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ellie.